So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you, although I wish we could be together in 3 dimensions instead of 2 dimensions. I would like to thank the organizers of the meeting and Barbara Bryant in particular for giving me this opportunity. It's really an honor to give this lecture to you. So these are my potential conflicts of interest. I don't think any of them are relevant for today's talk, except for the bottom one, and you'll see the relevance of that as I give my talk. So as with almost everything in transfusion medicine, our world began with Karl Landsteiner, who in 1900 in Vienna, Austria, discovered the ABO blood group system. He then was invited to New York City to the Rockefeller Institute, and in the early 20th century, in addition to all the other work that he did, he and his colleagues discovered the M, N, and P blood group systems. Part of his role at the Rockefeller was to train young scientists, and 2 of his students, also in New York City, were Philip Levine and Alexander Wiener, and they discovered the RH blood group, the RH blood group system. Unfortunately, they didn't get along well with each other, and there was a fair amount of controversy as they competed for recognition really for the rest of their lives. But in any case, they discovered the RH blood group system. Also, earlier in the 20th century, there were 4 diseases of fetuses and neonates that had been described: erythroblastosis fetalis, fetal hydrops, neonatal anemia and jaundice, and kernicterus. And these were all thought to be separate diseases at that time. But later on in the century, Dr. Diamond in Boston and Dr. Chown and colleagues in Canada came up with a unifying hypothesis and a unifying pathophysiological mechanism that all of these were different manifestations of the same disease, which we now call hemolytic disease of the fetus and newborn. And the underlying pathophysiology is that a IgG antibody in the mother that recognizes a red blood cell blood group antigen crosses the placenta, binds to the fetal red blood cells, and destroys them, leading to various signs and symptoms that were described in these 4 different manifestations of the same disease. And just in pictorial form, as it relates to the RH blood group system, this can happen when there's an RH positive father and an RH negative mother who is carrying a fetus who is RH positive. And classically at delivery, there's some maternal fetal hemorrhage, and some fetal red blood cells enter the maternal circulation. They're RH positive. This is a blood group that the mother doesn't have, so she views these as foreign and is sensitized and makes alloantibodies against RHD, and which remain in her circulation and then can affect the subsequent fetus and or neonate. So classically, RH disease is not seen in the first pregnancy. That's the sensitization event, and then the disease manifests itself in the second and further pregnancies. So in the 1960s, there were 2 competing groups, one in England and in Great Britain, led by Cyril Clarke and Ronnie Finn, and one in America, centered in New York City, led by Vince Freda, John Gorman, and Bill Pollack. And this was before the internet and Twitter and Facebook, and so one needed to use mail on an ocean liner or mail even by an airplane. And so these 2 groups mostly worked in isolation in the beginning, not even knowing of each other or knowing that they were competing. And as time went on, realizing that they were competing to do the same thing. And they had very similar ideas on how to prevent RH disease by preventing RH sensitization, and they succeeded. And in 1980, all 5 of them were winners of the Lasker Award, which is thought of as a pre-Nobel Prize in the United States, although Nobel Prize was not awarded for this work. And John Gorman, unfortunately, John Gorman is the only one of these pioneers who is still alive. This is what John Gorman and Vince Freda looked like in the 1960s. John is on the left and Vince is on the right. I am the Executive Vice Chair of Pathology at Columbia University, New York Presbyterian Hospital. This is where I work. I was not here in the 1960s, but this is where Vince, who is an OBGYN taking care of women and their babies with Rh disease, and John was a blood banker in our department of pathology. He ran the blood bank in our department of pathology. And this is what John Gorman looked like in 2016 when we inaugurated the John Gorman Lectureship, and he was healthy enough and well enough to come join us at Columbia. It was really a pleasure to have him here and walk around with him as he reminisced about his old haunts when he worked here many years ago. So John will tell you that he was stimulated by reading a textbook as he was preparing to teach medical students pathology, and in the textbook it referenced a paper by Theobald Smith, who was a pathologist very early in the 20th century, and in particular this paper John went back and read, and it stimulated his thought process, and he had an aha moment. And what Theobald Smith was doing was trying to enhance the immune response to diphtheria toxin. This is very similar to the efforts today with COVID-19 to develop gamma globulin products or human monoclonal antibodies as passive immunization therapy. This was very hot in the early 20th century, and in fact, the first Nobel Prize was awarded for this type of work. And what Theobald Smith found was that by mixing different ratios of the toxin with the antitoxin, which is the antibody, you could either stimulate or inhibit the immune response. And typically in this setting, people are interested in enhancing the immune response. But Dr. Smith discovered that if there was an excess of antibody as compared to antigen, it would actually block the immune response to that toxin. And this set off a light bulb in John's brain, suggesting that perhaps by infusing large amounts of the antibody, or in this case, the antitoxin, against the Rh antigen, it could prevent the mother from being stimulated and sensitized and develop an anti-D antibody. So the ideas in New York City and in Liverpool were very similar, and the idea was to inject Rh negative prima gravidas at delivery. So after they delivered their first child, the idea was to inject them with IgG anti-D. The different approaches were that in Liverpool they were using plasma. It's very analogous to convalescent plasma that people are trying now for COVID-19. Whereas the idea in New York City was to use a purified gamma globulin product. Bill Pollock was a protein chemist, and making gamma globulin products was advanced cutting edge technology at that time. And Bill worked for Ortho Diagnostics in New Jersey, and so he was able to take large amounts of pooled plasma and make a concentrated gamma globulin product. The investigators also thought it would be malpractice and would actually cause disease to give this antibody during pregnancy. So they only gave it after the woman delivered her first baby. And then they followed the woman for several months after delivery to see if she developed anti-D. And then the even more stringent test was that if she got pregnant again and had another Rh positive fetus and neonate, did she become immunized during that pregnancy? So these are the results of their first paper, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967. Interestingly, this was a 2-page paper, very different from the type of papers that you need to publish in New England Journal then. And this was their major table. This was their major results. I'll walk you through them. And so they looked at women 6 months after delivery, after they delivered an Rh positive child. And they had 2 groups, one who got Rh immune globulin and one group did not. And at the end of 6 months, none of the 582 women who received Rh immune globulin made an antibody, whereas about 10 or 12% of the women who did not receive Rh immune globulin became sensitized. This was a very dramatic result and a very clear-cut result, but they wanted even a more stringent test. So that was what happened at the next delivery. If the woman got pregnant again, they actually obviously had to wait quite a while for this to happen. And only a portion of the women became pregnant a second time during the time interval of the study. But again, they found dramatic results that none of the 72 women who had received Rh gamma globulin at the end of their first pregnancy became sensitized during their second pregnancy, whereas almost 20% or so of the women who didn't receive the treatment became sensitized. Again, the results with the untreated women mirrored what was already known at the time. So this was very dramatic results suggesting that this was 100% effective, and this is really what led to the Lasker Award and eventual regulatory approval of this for human use. However, as with many things in medicine, the best results are always in the first paper, and then as therapies get dispersed throughout the population and are used under non-research controlled settings, things are often not as good as in the original paper. And it was discovered that in practice, once Rh immune globulin became widely available, it turned out it was only about 90% effective. And so the investigators were puzzled by that and were thinking, well, why could that be? And one of the hypotheses was that maybe the mother was sensitized during pregnancy. Maybe there was a fetal maternal hemorrhage during pregnancy. The red cells got into the mother's circulation during pregnancy and she became immunized. And so by the time one would give her Rh immune globulin postpartum, it would be too late. So then it raised the question of, in humans, do fetal red blood cells enter the maternal circulation during pregnancy? And this, and then if they did, when did this happen? And so when did this happen was studied by one of the other pioneers in this field, Alvin Zapersky, who's also still alive. Both Alvin and John are about 90 years old at the moment and are both doing extremely well and are just wonderful, wonderful people. And so Alvin was a fellow in the 1950s, and he wrote a 2-page paper in The Lancet, again, one of the most prominent journals in medicine. And again, it's very hard to get a 2-page paper published anymore. And he discovered with his mentors that indeed in humans, fetal red cells could enter the maternal circulation during pregnancy. And many of you still use the same test that Alvin used, called the Kleihauer-Betke test, to identify fetal red cells in the maternal circulation. So based on, and Alvin is Canadian, he lives in Toronto, but at that point he was in Winnipeg, where he was in close collaboration with Drs. Bruce Chown and John Bowman. And so their hypothesis was that if indeed fetal red cells entered the maternal circulation during pregnancy, that maybe you should give Rh immune globulin during pregnancy. Remember that this was thought to be unethical and malpractice during the studies in the 1960s. And so they did that. And I was a resident at the time, and I remember reading this paper and was astounded that these gentlemen in Canada and decided to give basically the disease-causing entity, the anti-D, to women during pregnancy to prevent the disease. But in fact, it worked. There were no side effects. Marion Lewis was a woman, is a woman. It was not just men who were doing this. And this was an amazing result that amazed some of the early investigators who thought that this would be too dangerous and shouldn't be done. And we now know that by giving antenatal and postnatal Rh immune globulin, you can prevent 99%, is 99% effective at preventing sensitization. So 2018 was the 50th anniversary of the regulatory approval of Rh immune globulin. This drug, the original drug was called Rogam. That still is the trade name for one company's version of this drug. And that was initially made by Ortho and Johnson & Johnson, and then was purchased about 10 or 15 years ago by an Italian company called Kedrion. And so Kedrion approached me and said, we should have a 50th anniversary celebration for this event. And because Colombia was so central in this discovery, we should have the celebration at Colombia. So I agreed to organize such an event. And here's the poster from that event, which was held in February 2018. And we had people come from all over the world to talk about the development of this drug, the use of this drug, the problems with this drug, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a very stimulating, inspiring day. And in fact, we wrote a very short paper, the shortest paper I've ever written. It's a one-page paper in Transfusion about this event. And here's the picture on the left of John Gorman, who I showed you this picture before. But another person also attended this event, and that is Marianne Cummins, thank you. Marianne Cummins, who was the first patient to receive the drug after regulatory approval. And not only was Marianne there, but her husband was there, one of her children was there, and the physician who actually gave her the injection in 1968 was there. And so it was really a tremendous and inspiring day. And just to give you an idea, you're not supposed to read this slide. There were many, many celebrations around the world to celebrate this event. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend several of them. And then Kedrion came back and said, well, maybe we should have a final celebration to wrap up the year of all of these events, and we should have it at Columbia. And I agreed to do that, although I didn't want it to be a celebration. Because I discovered that even after 40 years practicing transfusion medicine and thinking that I knew everything about RH disease and how to prevent it, I learned a lot during this year. In particular, I learned that it seemed as if half the women in the world who needed this therapy did not have access to it. So I said we could do that, but only if it wasn't a celebration, because it didn't seem to me that we had conquered RH disease completely, that we have not yet gotten to where we need to go. And so in November of 2018, we did have another event at Columbia, but I termed it the first annual International Symposium for the Global Eradication of RH disease. This is an over-the-top description. By calling it annual, I suppose that we would do this more than once. By calling it international, I suppose that this would be an international effort. And by calling for the global eradication of RH disease, I gave us a target to shoot for, although none of this may be eventually achievable, but we will do the best we can, and the rest of my talk will focus on this. So we learned on that day, again, by inviting people from all over the world and basically having them tell us what the problems were rather than tell us what the celebration was all about. We learned that there are different issues that need to be solved in different countries. For instance, in South America, and in this case, the country of Colombia, not Columbia University, we learned that the system, although they have sufficient resources to prevent this disease, their healthcare system is quite fragmented. And one of the problems is there are no consensus guidelines in Spanish for what they should do. So if a midwife or an obstetrician or a pediatrician doesn't speak English, it's very hard for them to learn what the current consensus guidelines are. So that was one problem. In contrast, a different type of problem was described in Russia, where it was described to us that there's low awareness of RH disease and how to prevent it. Obstetricians don't even know about RH disease or know about the potential cure or prevention, particularly in more rural areas. And you're all aware that Russia is a huge country that's dispersed over many square miles. So the number of people who were present that day decided that we should study this in a more rigorous way. And so we decided to do what we called a gap analysis. And that paper resulting from the gap analysis was just published a couple of weeks ago in PLOS One. It's available for free. It's an open access journal. And so if you're interested in the details of this paper, you can easily download it on your computer. So the question was actually a simple one, was could we figure out the true gap of the doses of Rh immunoglobulin that were required by women around the world and compare that to the number of doses that were actually given. The first question of how many doses are needed is an epidemiological question, and we could only estimate that by using various sources of epidemiological data. Determining the actual doses given is not as difficult because this is considered a drug and is regulated as a drug and manufactured as a drug, and so it is, and there are relatively few companies that are involved in this manufacture, so it's fairly straightforward to figure out the exact number of doses that were manufactured and sold, and so we're going to assume for this purpose that all of the doses that were sold were actually administered. It's a hypothesis, but that was the best we could do. And so the true gap, based on the Canadian study that I described before, was how many antepartum doses are needed and how many postpartum doses are needed. That's the amount that are needed, and you subtract from that the actual doses that were manufactured that year and given. And these are the results in a pictorial fashion for all of the countries for which we could obtain data. The countries in white are countries that for various reasons data was not readily available, but data was available for more than 150 countries around the world. And in this global diagram, dark green is good. So you can see the United States, Brazil, the Nordic countries are dark green. Light green is okay, so Russia is okay. Yellow is not so good, orange is even worse, and red is really, really bad. And so there are some very large countries that are either orange or red. So India is orange, China's red, and you can see just from this that there are a lot of women in the world who are not being protected. And so we calculated the results that I'm going to show you based on a simplistic original approach. So let's imagine if we only gave Rh immune globulin postpartum. That would be the minimum amount that would get you 90% of the way there in preventing sensitization. We're down 2.5 million doses. 2.6 million doses are the gap. These are the number of doses that would require, that the world requires, that women in the world require to prevent sensitization. These are Rh negative women carrying an Rh positive fetus. 2.5 million doses. And so that leads to about 300,000 fetuses or neonates at risk for developing erythroblastosis fetalis, fetal hydrops, kernicterus, all of these complications of hemolytic disease of the fetus and newborn. And so we did a back of the envelope calculation that if you imagine that it costs about $50 a dose, and we can argue whether it's 50 or 25 or 75, but for argument's sake, it's about $50 a dose. This is all made from pooled human plasma, so one needs to identify donors, collect their plasma, pool the plasma, fractionate it, put it in vials, everything else. So at $50 a dose, that would be $130 million a year. So for me, or presumably you, $130 million is a lot of money. But if you think about it globally, and you think about the size of the Gates Foundation or the NIH or the amount of money that's spent on armaments or whatever, $130 million a year is really not that much money to make and deliver this cure, this prevention of Rh disease. However, just to be clear, this is an oversimplification. That's only to produce the drug, and it doesn't address the issues of, do we even have the capacity to make another 2.5 million doses? And how do we get this to people in these countries that are doing quite poorly? So the real cost is more than $130 million, but it's in that ballpark, and just to give you a feel for what's involved. So we think not only are we not done, but this provides many opportunities. And one of the opportunities is to leave our silo. So this meeting that I'm talking to now, probably 90 or more % of the people who attend this meeting are in transfusion medicine, whether they're physicians or techs or apheresis nurses or administrators, they're in transfusion medicine. But this is not, I would argue, a transfusion medicine problem at all. We are often the place that, makes the diagnosis, stores the Rh immune globulin, gives it out. But one could argue it's a neonatology or pediatrics problem because that's who's affected. I could argue it's really an OBGYN and midwife problem because they're the ones who see the woman, they're the ones who give the drug. But so I've just listed all the different types of entities, donor safety, public health, industry, et cetera, who are really involved in, if we're going to solve this problem and doing it right. And if we're going to do it right, we need to have get-togethers or meetings where we all get together, not the OBGYNs getting together on their own, the transfusion medicine people getting on their own, but some forum where we all talk to each other and figure out, is this a big problem? And if we think it is a big problem, then how are we going to solve it? So the outcome of the meeting in November of 2018 was the let's do something. So what are we doing? We're trying to close the gap. And so one way of starting to close the gap is to educate people. So two OBGYNs, Jerry Visser and Giancarlo Dorenzo. Jerry is Dutch, Giancarlo is Italian, and I wrote a paper for the major journal in obstetrics and gynecology on behalf of the major organization in obstetrics and gynecology, which is called FIGO or FIGO. It's a federation of all of the obstetrics and gynecology country organizations around the world. And we issued a call to action and to educate people, as we have been educated, that there's a significant continuing burden of disease even 50 years after the curative prevention was identified and approved. And so we think that there are 50% of the women globally who need the drug don't get the drug, and so we would like to energize everyone to solve this problem. But just to let you know that this is not a problem only of lower and middle income countries. We see Rh disease in the United States, and this is an example from Italy, a short paper by Mario De Curtis, who was involved in these celebrations in 2018, and he prepared the data of Rh disease that he's seen in the Lazio region. So Lazio is the area of Italy surrounding Rome, the capital of Italy. And here's the data. So in 2006, 1 out of 1,000 live births had Rh disease, not hemolytic disease in newborn and fetus, but Rh disease. And through educational efforts and other efforts, they've been able to decrease that down to by about 60% to 0.4 out of 1,000. And Mario discovered that many of these women, although they live in a high-income Western country, were actually immigrants from lower or middle-income countries where their first pregnancy was done in their home country, if you will, and that's where they became sensitized unknowingly most of the time, and then immigrated to Italy, and then the disease manifested itself in their second, third, or fourth pregnancy. So this is not just an illness of lower and middle income countries. So in order to do something and to break out of our silos, a number of us decided to form a new organization. And so we met in Rome in March of 2019. These are the conspirators who met in Rome. You can see me in the middle, and to my right, standing right in front, is Giancarlo Dorenzo, and to my left is Jerry Visser, And we met and we met for a day and argued a lot about what should we do and how should we do it, and et cetera, et cetera. And the most argument came with, once we decided we should form an organization, then what should we call the organization? And could we come up with a catchy name that that described what we wanted to do and had a useful acronym? And so the new organization is called WIRhE, the Worldwide Initiative for RH Disease Eradication. And we like the concept of a wire because wires connect things. And so our little blurb is, WIRhE connects the world to protect mothers and babies. And we have a single compelling vision, and that's to eradicate RH disease. And to do that, we would like to encourage, enable, and empower anyone who wants to work with us or work without us to get the drug to more of the women in the world who need it. So to begin such an organization, what do you need? Well, we would like people, we have no resources, so even though, as you'll see, I'm the executive director, I get paid nothing and I volunteer my time for this organization, but we have incorporated it in New York State as a charitable organization. We've applied for tax-exempt status, and once we have tax-exempt status, we would be able to solicit donations to help keep the organization going. We have a website. I'll talk more about that in a sec. We have a logo. That took a long time. And we have a key visual. That also took a long time in discussions. This is our logo. It emphasizes the RH, and we highlight RH in red to give the impression that this is present in red cells. And we like this logo a lot. And then it took a long time and lots of arguments to come up with a key visual that would quickly get across the points that we want to get across, but get it across in a politically sensitive and appropriate way. And so here you can see the outline of a mother and child, and our sort of blurb is compatibility for life. I made a presentation last year at the ABB meeting to the Spanish language group, who were very interested. And as you recall, what I talked about the country of Colombia, they're very interested in helping us not only participate in the efforts, but translate things into Spanish. And their first effort was to translate this key visual into Spanish. And so now it's also available in Spanish, and people can download this and make posters or make banners or do whatever they think will help. In terms of the organization itself, the group decided, sort of over my objections, but I said okay anyway, that I would become the executive director of this organization and put in the effort to get it incorporated as a charitable organization. My deputy director is Bree Stadler, who's a physician at Columbia University, a transfusion medicine physician. And interestingly, when Bree was growing up, her dog was called Rogam, and she didn't know why it was called Rogam until she went to medical school. And not only discovered what Rogam was, but why her parents decided to name the dog after Rogam. And also Bree on Saturday was fortunate enough to deliver a healthy baby boy who's doing extremely well, as is she and her husband. And the baby does not have hemolytic disease, a newborn, and they're all doing very well. So we also put together a board of directors that we wanted to be diverse in multiple ways and interdisciplinary in multiple ways. And so to get started, we appointed the board. Over time, we think the board will be elected, but to get started, this is who we appointed. And you can see Giancarlo Dorenzo and Jerry Visser, who were the Italian and Dutch OBGYNs. At the upper right is Isaac Odame, who's from Ghana originally, but is a full professor at the University of Toronto, and he's a pediatrician, and he's very wonderful, engaged individual. And then on the bottom row is Huashan, who runs transfusion medicine at Stanford and was originally born and trained in China and has very close relationships with transfusion medicine in China. And then finally, Ellen van der Schoot, who's also Dutch and who runs the Dutch program for pre-delivery pregnancy during pregnancy, identification of the Rh type of the fetus using cell-free DNA methods. We also appointed a council of honorary members. I've already shown you pictures of John Gorman and Alvin Zapersky. Remember, John's a blood banker, Alvin's a pediatrician, and we also appointed Marcela Contreras, who many of you, I'm sure, know from her years in transfusion medicine and for her editorial work and contributions, in many ways, in particular to Mollison's textbook of transfusion medicine. Although we haven't completed all of our tasks, we also intend to have a council of global advisors so that we have diversity internationally of industrial partners like Kedrion, who makes one form of Rh immune globulin, and Eldon, who makes a point of care blood typing testing test. We've gotten a bunch of academic organizations, I'll show you more about that in a second, and various non-governmental organizations. So 2 have already agreed, Research Solution Initiative, which is an African, a Nigerian organization, and Emergency, which is the Italian version, if you will, of Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, and we're still in discussions with MSF. We would also like to include patients and patient advocates, and we're open to including other people. We view this as a big tent, and we want everyone who's interested to participate. Of course, this is the 21st century, and so social media is very important. And with me being a child of the 20th century, this is not necessarily my strength. And so we're very fortunate to engage Daniela Hermelin, who many of you know, who's an incredible teacher, has incredible energy, and is a transfusion medicine physician at St. Louis University. And she's our social media director. And so we are live on Twitter, and she keeps our Twitter presence going, and we're getting more and more visibility in this way. So what do we intend to do? We would like to serve as a clearinghouse, so as a one-stop shopping, that if anyone is interested in Rh disease, they could come to our website or view our Twitter account or join our organization to find out what's happening around the world. We want to encourage, empower, enable anyone who's doing anything. If they have ongoing projects that they're doing independently, that's great. We will advertise for them. If they want to participate in projects that we're doing, that's great. We're going to advertise worldwide efforts using the website, and we'll link to other websites. We'll link to newspaper articles, videos, whatever, to make sure that people can become aware of the activities in this field. We also would like, this is not trivial, and we do need funding for this, which is part of the reason we need to be a tax-exempt organization, to serve as a data warehouse. So it was actually a huge effort to try to figure out what percentage of women are not protected who should be protected as of 2018. It would be great to be able to continue this investigation on an annual basis, perhaps produce an annual report to see if we're making any progress towards closing that gap. That's something we would like to do, but that is not a very simple thing to do. We would like to have an annual meeting. I'll show you more about that in a second. We had our first annual meeting last year. We were able to raise enough money from different organizations to provide staff travel stipends. I also dedicated the Gorman Lectureship, which is an endowed lectureship at Columbia, to this purpose. So wherever this meeting will be held, the annual Gorman Lectureship will be the keynote lecture of that meeting and will be funded by Columbia University. And so we would like to develop a single locus for patients, physicians, anyone. We would like to collect stories of women who have been affected or have had children affected by Rh disease. We would like to have videos from pioneers, from investigators, and this is a term called narrative medicine, which is, so how does a disease, or how does the cure of a disease affect the individuals themselves? And we would like to provide the latest information. We've already started. Our intention is to review every new paper that comes out every year related to RH disease, and the ones that we think are suitable for distribution, we will write a little 3-sentence blurb about it and either link to the PDF itself if it's an open access journal like PLOS One, or link to the National Library of Medicine so people could download and read the original paper if they would like. And then this is also a fairly time-consuming effort, but we would like to develop practice guidelines that are useful around the world. We're working on a manuscript now that is being finalized to submit for publication in English. And assuming that it is accepted and published in English, then we intend to translate it into multiple languages. I've already described to you that we have a Spanish language group who will translate it into Spanish, but we have groups of people who are interested in translating it into Italian, Chinese, Russian, Polish, etc. This is just a picture of the existing website. If you want to, you can go to it. It's live. Turns out it's not as user-friendly as we wanted, and the website designers were also not as user-friendly as we wanted. So we are currently in the process of migrating it with the same address to a new website with new website developers. And so the new version will be live, we hope, by early or mid-September, but the website is live now if you would like to look. We intend to apply for our own grant funding to pursue what's termed implementation research, which is we know how to cure this disease. We know how to prevent this disease. We don't need to do research on how to prevent this disease. We need to do research on how to implement the prevention. And various organizations, the NIH, the Gates Foundation, Merck for Mothers, have grant programs that we intend to apply for. We also are interested in helping others apply for their own grants. We don't only have to do them through this organization. In the meantime, we've signed memoranda of understanding with several groups. I'll show you which ones in a second. And we would like to continue to get as many groups as possible to sponsor our organization for no money. We're not asking for money. We're just asking for their blessing, if you will, so that we can list them on our website and we can reach out to them when we think we have new information to share. And this is just an example. These are examples of the ones that we've already developed. They include the AABB, for instance, and ISBT is somewhere on here. Here's ISBT. The Italian version of AABB is called SIMPTI. I mentioned FIGO, which is the International OBGYN Organization, and Emergency, which is the Italian version of Doctors Without Borders, and Hospital for Sick Kids in Toronto, et cetera, et cetera. So last year in September, we had our first international WIRhE meeting, it was both a 2-day meeting. One day was closed to invited individuals, and the second day was open to anyone who wanted to participate. For example, we had Dr. Weizhou Yang, who is basically the head of OBGYN in China, come to talk to us. One of the issues is people say, well, why do we need to worry about RH disease in China? 99% of Chinese people are RH positive, so there's no disease. But she was able to give us data to support some of the contentions of people like me that yes, 1% of women in China are RH negative, but China has over 1 billion people, and half of them are women. And so 1% of a large number is still a large number. And the chances of her, of an RH negative woman having a baby with an RH positive father is, 99%. And so it turns out there's a lot of RH disease in China, and there's no RH immune globulin in China, none, zero. So there's no way to prevent this disease in China. And now there's great interest in doing this, and we're trying to work with them to help make that happen. And our Gorman lectureship last year in Italy was a very famous Italian transplantation immunologist immunologist, Giuseppe Ramuzzi, who gave the Gorman lecture last year. And so, and this was the picture we took at the end of the lecture, and we tried to get everybody to show what we decided was the new international sign for WIRhE, which was to make a W with two of your hands. I'm making one right now, but if you look closely at the picture, you could see that not everybody could follow directions. This was like herding cats. So Jerry Visser's just giving a thumbs up, and other people are going like this. And, you know, for all I know, there's someone in there who's showing a finger that we should not be showing. But this was a wonderful meeting at a very historic site in Florence that was very evocative. It was an orphan hospital that was built in the 1400s in Florence, and it was a wonderful place to have a meeting and to remind us of what we were meeting about and who we were trying to protect and save. So we had, at that meeting, we decided that we would have a second WIRhE meeting, and the meeting was planned this year in October for Amsterdam. But as with your meeting, COVID-19 got in the way, so we are not going to have that meeting in Amsterdam. And so what are we going to do? And so we've actually been talking about having a Zoom meeting similar to the one that you're having right now. We may have that. There are certain advantages to doing that, so we won't have to raise money to provide travel stipends for people to come from around the world. And so we actually think we could get better participation, particularly from lower middle income countries. Obviously, we can record the meeting, and so that's probably what we'll do, but we're in the process of planning that now. And for those of you who would still like to learn more, an additional WIRhE activity will be present at the ABB annual meeting in October. Again, that will also be a video conference meeting, and I'm running a session called RH Disease Still a Global Problem. One of the speakers is Washan, who you can't see her picture, but I showed you her picture before. She's on the board of WIRhE, and then two of our junior faculty members from Columbia, Sarah Basugi, a transfusion medicine physician, and Crystal Hudson, who's what I call a real immunologist, will be giving more cutting edge, up-to-date education on how to prevent this disease and what do we know about the pathophysiology of why does RhoGAM even work, or why does RH immune globulin even work. And so I hope I've given you the idea that we still have a lot of work to do. I hope if you're interested, you'll join us. We have no barriers to admission to this club, if you will, and we're looking for people who want to participate. And I'd like to thank you very much. This is a photo of John Gorman, who I feel is always looking over my shoulder and saying, "So Steve, what have you done today?" And so thank you very much. And again, I'd like to thank the organizers and Dr. Bryant for this opportunity and for this honor, and have a nice day. Thank you.